Hey, Jeffrey, thanks for joining the show today. Can you give us a little bit of background and context on your journey, your experience on the UX research side?
Sure. So I started off as a UX designer. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And when I first started, I actually was kind of a one-man team doing UX design, doing prototyping, doing my own user research. And even before that, I was actually a coder. So I had the perspective of what was a design process and what was it like to be a coder, getting requirements coming out of the design process. So that was a really good starting point for me. I started to focus in on building out a UX team.
Okay.
This was at JP Morgan. It was there that I really began to appreciate the value of user research in the user-centered design process, and started to focus a lot more on building out the infrastructure needed so that designers and even BAs and product owners could do their own research. After I left JP Morgan, I decided I wanted to be more of a consultant. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted to just expand the domain in which I was doing UX from just financial services. I worked for a mining company. You know, those giant trucks where the wheels are the size of a house.
Yep.
Designing the navigation systems for those, so they would tell the drivers the most efficient way of getting their payload to the right place to drop it off. After 6.5 years of doing consulting, went to Fidelity. And at Fidelity, that was probably the most mature UX practice I ever worked for. There were 350 people in their UX team. I helped build out a user research practice for their institutional side. They'd always focused very much on their consumer side. But they also have this platform that's designed to be used by financial advisors. And so I worked on that. A lot of us moved over to Goldman Sachs. I was researcher number one and found myself in a familiar place, building out a research practice again. And that's what I've been working on for the last 3 years, building out the infrastructure.
In the finance area specifically, there's tons of regulations. How does that affect your approach to research?
Yeah, it does in a lot of ways. Privacy, what's called PII. Here in the US, we certainly have rules around how companies can collect personal information and what they can do with it and what they have to tell the people that they're collecting it from that they're doing with it. And it's not nearly as strict as those same rules in the European Union and the UK. So you have to be very careful of not only what data you're collecting, but where you're collecting it and where you're storing it even. It's a lot of stuff to be thinking about as a user researcher. I mean, you'd really rather be thinking about how do I tweak the questions to make sure I'm getting unbiased answers that are actionable, right? Those are the most important aspects of it. But unfortunately, you also have to be working closely with the lawyers in your organization or outside your organization, just to make sure that you're doing things the right way.
So you've been in the field for a while, and obviously tons of things have changed in the past year, and that probably led to a lot of other change that's coming down the pipeline. What type of trends have you seen shift in specifically the UX research world?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger trends is getting away from reports. Traditionally, user research was conducted, then there was some analysis done, and you would create a report or some other types of deliverables like a set of personas or a user journey that shows, all the different phases that the user goes through in interacting with your product or your brand. Those things are useful. I think they're still useful, but to some degree, don't fit in with the more agile approach to product design that we have now. They take too long. As soon as you finish one version of it, things are so dynamic that you have to go back and start changing it right away. So that's one trend, right? This idea of more granular insights, getting rid of reports as deliverables, that's one. Another thing was remote user testing. COVID, working from home, using Zoom, has just really cemented this idea that we should be doing more remotely. For me, I always thought much better to test someone in their own environment than to bring them into a lab.
A great point.
I've worked for companies with multi-million-dollar labs and never used them myself because I tried to do research remotely where I had whoever I was talking to, whoever I was testing with, sitting at their own computer within their own office or their home. That's another trend, is utilizing remote testing a lot more in a lot more situations, and getting away from labs and even the necessity to travel a lot to people's locations to conduct research.
There's tools that support these trends. What are some of those tools you're currently using, and which ones do you think are becoming the new necessary, the new norm in remote research?
The granddaddies of them all, I would say, would be the survey tools. So Qualtrics is probably the most prominent one. They've done the best job of building a whole set of complementary features around the survey tool, and building in a lot of help and feedback to the person creating a survey as they're creating it. And then UserZoom is also probably the oldest of the online unmoderated usability testing tools. It's really designed for an advanced user researcher. It allows you to really change just about everything. You can get down to changing the system error messages in the platform to whatever you want them to say. But it allows you to create all this like complex piping so that you can take the answer from one question and put it into the question for another one. Another one that I really like is user testing. The people that are in their panel are trained to be participants. So you see their face, you hear them, and you can share whatever you want, a prototype or production environment with them. And they've been trained to do the think out loud protocol, which normally on an unmoderated usability test is a little hard to do.
So Jeffrey, what type of advice would you have for new entrants in the field, be it design or research?
The more we can base our design decisions on actual data, actual observed behavior or preferences from our users, the better off we are. And if we can even go so far as to align those design decisions to your actual designs, the better off you are. So think in Sketch or Figma, creating like a link into those insights I was talking about, right? Like, this is the reason why we made this design decision. Go here to see. You know, there's the statistical side of things. So web analytics is part of it. So as a designer and as a researcher, getting more comfortable with big data. And then the other thing I would say as a designer is it behooves you to learn how to moderate an interview and a basic usability tests, or what we call a contextual inquiry, where you go visit someone in their workplace, whether that's virtually or physically, and watch them do things. You don't necessarily ask them to do much more than just show me how you currently do X, Y, or Z. Go out and do some of your own testing. You know, like if you get access to some of your users, certainly ask them some design questions, but also take the time to just get to know them better. Empathy, in the end, is the goal of everything that we're doing. All the user research, the ultimate goal is to gain empathy with your users. Because as a designer, you will be a much better designer if you have empathy for your end users. As a developer, as a coder even, you will be a much better coder if you have empathy for the people who have to use this, right? And that's where this idea of wearing many hats is an important aspect of design. You want to be able to say, take off my aesthetic, this is what I want to put in my portfolio hat, right?
Mhm.
That's great. Pull that off, put on, this is Joe user or Jane user hat, and I'm going to design, I might design things differently. It might not be the way that I would want it designed. It might not look the way that I would want it to be designed. But because I did that, because I'm wearing that other hat, because I went through the time and effort to gain that empathy, to really understand my users, I can really design something that will resonate and help them be successful.
Absolutely. That's good advice. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being on the show today.
No problem. It's fun.